Hello my friend, I'm Doreen Virtue and this is my office, and I wanted to talk with you today about a book I wrote called Don't Let Anything Dull Your Sparkle, and give you the backstory on it and why I think it's so important for everyone who feels stressed or who has been traumatized to read this book. This is a book based on research done by myself and many leading scientists and psychologists on how stress and trauma affects us. The backstory is that I was traveling for 25 years all around the world and I loved it, but travel itself was getting more and more stressful. And one time Michael and I had been in Toronto, Canada during a very snowy weekend, and we were in a hotel and we're both vegans, and the only thing they served at this hotel for food, where we didn't have to go outside to eat, was sauteed marinated mushrooms, the portobello mushrooms that are marinated in balsamic vinegar, and then they had spinach salads with a vinaigrette dressing. It was delicious and we were really happy all weekend, but I noticed that I started to feel bloated, my skin started to itch, my heart started to palpitate, and I just didn't feel right and I didn't sleep well, and I just credited it to travel stress. And then when we got to Toronto Airport to go to our next destination, San Francisco, I checked in with Michael to get our tickets, and I was told by the airline representative that I had been selected randomly for extra screening through the international side of the airport. And they handed me an airline ticket that said SSS for, I guess, special screening services. And the combination, and I'll tell you why this is, of what I'd eaten and being in a cold environment and being stressed caused me to just lose it right there in the airport. I started to cry. And I'm usually really composed. I mean, of course I cry, I'm human, but it was this frustration. Have you ever felt that way, just so frustrated that you just can't stand it anymore? That's how I felt that day in the airport, and I felt helpless too, because I had this ticket. I needed to go to San Francisco to teach at the writer's workshop there, and so I had to go through this screening. Now, I didn't want to go through the x-rays, so they did the manual pat-down, and they do it twice when you're doing international flights with the special screening. And I'm not saying this as a pity party, but just to kind of give the backdrop of what happened. So I had been thinking about quitting traveling for a long time anyway. It had probably been 3 years where I thought, well, I'm winding this down. I'm not going to travel anymore. I'm going to stay home with my animals and do animal rescue work and videos like this. And that day really just clinched it. I was like, okay, I'm done. So I got to San Francisco, and I was walking with Michael around the beautiful city, and I heard this voice. Now, if you're not familiar with me, I'm someone who's a former psychotherapist, but I'm also a lifelong clairvoyant, and so I see energy and then I hear energy, and I do what's called angel readings, where I talk to guardian angels and archangels for messages, of course also to God, Holy Spirit, and Jesus. And I heard this voice outside my right ear. It was the same voice I had heard when my life had been saved in an armed carjacking back in 1995. During that time, this male voice outside my head that I could hear so clearly warned me that if I didn't put the top up on my convertible car, that it would be stolen. I didn't know what that meant. I was going to an appointment at a church in Anaheim, California, and my top was down on my car because the electric motor was broken. And there was no rain in California, so I didn't need it to be up. But because it was down, I was spotted by 2 men who'd been going around Anaheim doing carjackings that day, and I was their third person. And I pulled in the parking lot of that church, and I was jumped by 2 armed men who had a gun and a knife, and then they had a getaway car that was idling in the background. Now, I got out of that with my life and my car, because that male voice that had told me that my car was going to be stolen was right there with me, just because we ignore our angels. They don't leave us, fortunately. And this voice told me that I needed to scream with all my might. Not a frightened screaming like you would expect in an armed carjacking, but to scream from this guttural place like a cave woman. And I went right from what they call the diaphragm, that's the base of your stomach where singers draw up their strength of voice, and I screamed so loud. I didn't even know I had that in me. And the men's eyes got this big, and they backed away, and I thought, oh, I have the power here. That was my thought. Even though they had a gun and a knife, when they got afraid, they became vulnerable, because that's how fear energy works. So my screams attracted the attention of people in the church, plus a woman who was in the parking lot who was eating her lunch, and she looked up and saw what was happening. So she leaned on her car horn, and the two men got in their car and drove away, and I was saved. And let me tell you, I got down on my knees right then, and I thanked God for saving my life and sending this voice, in which I believe was the Archangel Michael, to save my life, and how can I repay you? And I was told right then and there to become, well, I was a psychotherapist when this happened, specializing in eating disorders. I'd written books on eating disorders for years, etc., and had done work on how trauma leads to eating disorders and other addictions. And I was told to teach as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, that the angels are real and that they are with us. So that was 1995, July 15th. The very next day I was scheduled to give a talk in Las Vegas at the Health Food Convention. And I came out of the closet spiritually, and I said, look, I talked to angels, and they saved my life, and I want to tell you. And I started to tell my patients about their angels and teach them how to hear their own angels. And here I am today. But what I didn't know is that because of that situation where I'd been jumped and almost lost my life, that I had developed post-traumatic symptoms. What's ironic is that I had studied post-traumatic stress disorder with some of the great researchers, and I never saw that I had it myself. I only thought that people who went to war or who had severe abuse had post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course, those are horrible things to have happen to you. I didn't realize that the definition of post-traumatic stress disorder was anyone who feels like they're going to lose their life. And it doesn't have to be a literal threat. It can be, they now show that there's secondary post-traumatic stress disorder that you can have from watching the news and feeling afraid for this world, or listening to someone's stressful experience can measurably raise your stress hormones, particularly cortisol, and shows that your body and brain don't know the difference between watching or witnessing someone else's trauma and your own. And so I had all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and I didn't know it. And that is, and let me see if you relate to this, post-traumatic stress disorder is when you have the experience where you don't feel safe. And at that moment, when I was, the angel told me to scream, I didn't feel safe. I thought I was losing my life. Post-traumatic means that you thereafter have a higher stress trigger. So you can get triggered for stress really quickly after that. And you even can become what they call hypervigilant. Hypervigilant is where you're scanning to see if there's any danger coming up for you, and you just don't relax. A lot of people who have PTSD have sleep disorders. They have a really hard time relaxing without alcohol or drugs or falling asleep. And it's because your stress hormones are cranked up for perceived danger, because this experience shattered your sense of security. With PTSD, you have flashbacks. They can be the visual flashbacks that we always hear about with those who are in the war. And so that can be the case where you see the scenario over and over. But it can also be emotional flashbacks where you have that feeling that it's happening. You know, maybe you went through some sort of experience and it shattered your sense of safety, and you feel like this is going to happen again, and it keeps you from doing your life purpose, and it can also affect your self-esteem. There's many other symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and it can be from anything that, and there's thousands of experiences now that psychologists admit lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. So when I was in San Francisco following that experience at Toronto Airport, I was walking down the street and I heard this same voice that had warned me in the carjacking, and this is what it said, and I'm paraphrasing the exact sentence I wrote down, but I'm paraphrasing what it said. The voice said, "The world is addicted to drama because of histamine. The world is addicted to drama because of histamine." And I wrote this down in my notes, and I thought, well, maybe, I guess. And I'd never really, I had not studied histamine. Of course, I knew what it was. It's a naturally occurring substance that you actually need to make you wake up. It regulates your energy, whether you're tired or alert. And so I put that away, and I didn't even think of it. I actually posted it the next day on Facebook, because I had been posting messages I was getting from the angels. And then I didn't really get any comments on it. I didn't think anything more of it. And then I was at my computer, and here, just randomly, this Facebook page post that I had posted with that message about histamine popped up. And you know, those things, those are signs. You've got to pay attention to them. So I thought, okay, I'm going to look into this. So I started just diving headfirst into looking into histamine. And this is what I found, is that, as I said, we need a certain amount of histamine for our health, to be alert, to be awake. And you've probably heard of antihistamines like Benadryl, which you take if there's something you're allergic to reduce the swelling and the itchiness. Well, there's a lot in between there. And histamine is something your body naturally occurs, but it's also something that happens by environmental and dietary conditions. And so they include, if you're cold, and especially if you tend to be cold, that's a sign of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I had been in the snowy weekend in Toronto. I love Toronto. This is nothing against it. It was just the conditions that happened. And the snow that I had been in had upped my histamine. And then I'd eaten fermented foods. Now, food contains histamine. There's histamine releasers, there's histamine disinhibitors, and there's foods that are high, low, or medium in histamine. But the highest amount of histamine that you can get in foods that affects the histamine in your body, and the bloating, and the itching, and the heart palpitations, and the feeling like you've had 10 cups of coffee, and the anxiety that goes with all that, the highest histamine foods are fermented. And so anything that's pickled, anything that's aged, anything made with vinegar. I'm sorry, I know that you might like those foods. I did too. In fact, what we found is that whatever you're allergic to, you tend to binge upon. And so other fermented foods include aged meats. They include anything with vinegar in it, like mustard, mayonnaise, salad dressings. You know, and I had been eating that all weekend, plus been cold, plus been stressed. So your body carries a certain amount of histamine in it all the time. You can think of it like a histamine bucket. Let's see if I can do this with my hands. Okay, this is a histamine bucket. And so if the bucket's just about to here, you're fine. That's healthy. But then if you add anything that increases histamine, like being a post-traumatic stress disorder survivor, people who are trauma survivors have more histamine, they have more cortisol, they have more adrenaline and other stress hormones. And then if you add to that anything that increases your histamine, like eating a bunch of fermented food, alcohol, sugar, I'll go over some others. And then the cold on top of that, your histamine bucket overflows. It just can't take anymore. And that's when you start to have the symptoms. That's when you start to have breakdowns like I did in the Toronto airport right then. That's when you feel like you can't stand Earth anymore because it's just driving you crazy. And then you turn to often alcohol to calm down, but it exacerbates or increases the symptoms because it's got the histamine in it. Or you turn to food. And like I said, whatever we're addicted to, whatever we're allergic to, we will binge upon. We can't get enough of it because what it does is histamine actually feels good. It has a feel-good component to it. It's almost like an opiate would be. And so when you eat something that increases the histamine, you have a temporary high and a temporary calm. So let's take aged cheese, for instance. Yogurt would be another one because it's fermented. Anything that's got sugar, anything that's aged, fermented, it gives you that boost temporarily, like sugar does. But then you have the histamine overload from it. It's not a crash, but an overload, where you start to feel anxious. Your mind is wandering. You start to worry. You try all your prayers and your affirmations. You call on the angels, and you're still worried because it's a physical experience. It's not a mental thing. It's physical. Your body is trying to help you to escape an allergic reaction, just as if you went into a situation of anaphylaxis with a bee sting. It's the same kind of experience. Your body is on overload when you are trauma survivor mixed with life stress, mixed with histamine in your food and with cold. Other things that cause histamine include chemicals. So any kind of artificial chemicals in your environment, and that can include formaldehyde, that they put that in nail polish. Why? They put formaldehyde in carpeting and the dry cleaning fluid. There's studies. I have all these studies in my book, Don't Let Anything Dull Your Sparkle, if you want to read the references. They put all these chemicals into our lives, and they increase your histamine levels. They also increase your cortisol, even your adrenaline, because your body thinks it's in danger trying to fight off these chemicals. There's studies that show that genetically modified food, pesticides and herbicides increase your cortisol, adrenaline, and your histamine levels. So bottom line, if you relate to this and you're like me, you're very sensitive, you get triggered too fast, you go into panic, that's a sign of being a trauma survivor. Ah, the world is ending. I'm not making fun of it. I've been there. That's a sign of post-traumatic. And so we have to deal with this. So here's some things to do. Number one is know that this is treatable condition. There's many different ways, and again, I outlined these in my Sparkle book, but here's some simple ways. The studies show that probably the best and quickest way to reduce your cortisol level is to listen to gentle music. And so if you want to invest in anything to help yourself, get something like Sonos or Pandora and have it locked on the stations that are called spa music, nature music, meditation music, yoga music, and play that in the background. Now, if you're going into a stressful situation, you can actually calm the savage beast by having these soft tunes playing in the background. Studies also show that playing real combative music like heavy metal, especially death metal, increases your stress levels, your cortisol, your histamine levels. So you want to stay away from harsh music. Music is one of the ways you can help yourself. Flower essences and real flowers also help, and ingesting flowers. So studies show that lavender, either you can drink it as a tea powder, you can smell the lavender plant itself or the dried, I guess they're petals, the little stems on the lavender, or you can use the essential oil. And a really great way for trauma survivors is to spray the lavender oil on your pillow. It will help to calm you and help you to get a good night's sleep. There's also studies that show that the supplement called melatonin is a safe way, without any kind of hangover effect, to get a good night's sleep and to help you to relax. It reduces cortisol. It's interesting also that there's a lot of studies on melatonin helping with hair growth. And so they've shown that with animals like dogs with alopecia, which means baldness, or people who have baldness, the treatment is now gearing toward melatonin supplementation. Now, some medical conditions and some people who are on prescriptions cannot take melatonin. So do check with your health professional if you're on some sort of medical regimen. But for most people, the studies are showing really good signs of it being safe. And you can take it during the day. In fact, one of the things I want to tell you is that coffee increases coffee increases cortisol, it increases histamine, it increases adrenaline. And I'm probably stumbling over that because I'm aware that people don't like to hear this of their beloved coffee. They're like, you can take away my alcohol, you can take away the meat and the cheese and the dairy, but don't take away my coffee. But I have to tell you the truth, that coffee increases stress hormones and it increases anxiety. And so the normal thing to do is to have coffee in the morning to get going. And I used to do that too. I used to have, gosh, cups and cups of the strongest coffee, flavored coffee too. And I wondered why I was anxious. And what I mostly wondered was why I could not focus and meditate. And when I was first beginning to meditate, I asked God and the angels, what's going on here? Why can't I focus? And they said it was coffee. And I said, I don't want to give that up. And they said, well, would you like us to help you? And I said, of course. And so through just asking God and the angels for help, I had no cravings. I went cold turkey, no headaches, no withdrawal symptoms, and no cravings for coffee. And that was back in 1996. I've been caffeine free. Gosh, going on 20 and then 21 years now without coffee. And I look at all I do. I write constantly and have a lot of energy. I'm almost 60 years old and I feel like a kid. And so I'm living proof, hopefully, that you don't need caffeine to do your work, to be productive. In fact, I've found that caffeine actually makes you unproductive because you second guess yourself. You think, am I qualified? Am I ready? Can I do this? And you can do this. It's absolutely your birthright, your divine mission to do this. I switched to having herbal tea in the morning, including chamomile. And sometimes if it's a really stressful day, I will take one supplement of melatonin. And when you're relaxed, you can approach your work with a mind that can focus. I found immediately that I was able to focus and meditate and manifest instead of, the mismanifesting where you're, maybe I want this, maybe I want this, maybe I don't want that, all that sort of thing, and then you have feast or famine that you attract because of that. And so being caffeine free, I was able to focus, and so I highly recommend that if you are finding that you're blocked. Just give it a try. Do it safely if you find that you're addicted and get any headaches or withdrawal symptoms, of course. And on my website, DoreenVirtuePodcasts.com, I have a free podcast called Angel Therapy to be Caffeine Free that you can download, and when you put it in the cart, it says free. I think it says $3, and then until you put it in the cart, and then it's free. So do give that a try, because that's the same prayer that I used, the same meditation that helped me to be caffeine free so many years ago. And think of all the money I've saved. I have never bought a coffee at Starbucks, and they are expensive. They add up. So just a tip from me to you. Another way to increase your calming agent and decrease your cortisol and your histamine is through gentle yoga. Now, I've got a whole section about this in my Sparkle book, and it's really interesting. A lot of the studies coming from India, which is probably where yoga was mostly originated from, and it shows a few things, because I've been going to yoga classes for 20 years, and kind of had I'm sorry, but I had a love-hate relationship with yoga. Some of the classes I was like, this is not fun at all, and I like to have fun, and just the stress of driving to the yoga studio and finding a place to put your mat, and then it's crowded, and the teacher corrects you sometimes in ways where you feel like you're back in school being shamed in the front of the class. So I loved yoga, but I didn't love yoga classes. So I was so excited to get these studies that I put in the Sparkle book about how actually the high-impact yoga classes measurably increase stress hormones. And there's a place for them, and especially if you're not a trauma survivor and you're not stressed, go for those classes. They're cool to do, all those patient crane headstands and everything. They're beautiful to watch. But for people who are stressed, this is not the way for us to go. We need gentle yoga. And so the studies show, this is really cool, that 20 minutes of gentle yoga measurably decreases your cortisol and your histamine and adrenaline, your stress hormones. And so 20 minutes is great, because I used to find the hour-and-a-half yoga classes, they didn't work for me. As a busy person, juggling a lot, just driving to the yoga studio, doing an hour-and-a-half, and then driving home. I mean, it was 2.5 hours, and I think it's a worthwhile investment, but it wasn't realistic for me. So 20 minutes, I can do that. And the studies also showed that doing it at home, now you want to do it safely, but doing it at home, home-based 20-minute gentle yoga was the most effective for decreasing cortisol and other stress hormones. Yay! So I hired a neighbor who was a yoga teacher, and she did gentle yoga, and she really helped me because I'd been doing moderate yoga for so long. She really helped me learn how to slow down and do what's called yin, Y-I-N, like feminine energy, yin yoga. It's also known as restorative yoga, where you hold the pose for even up to 10 minutes. And you let your body release the stress that's within it. And if you do it at home, you can do it with a friend, you can do it, there's a million YouTube videos that are free called Gentle Yoga Class or Restorative Yoga, so you can look for those. Again, just make sure you're doing the poses safely, and you might want to consider with friends that you like, that you feel comfortable with. Maybe you can pool your money and hire a yoga teacher to give you a private session at home. It doesn't cost that much. Most yoga studios, you just call them and say, I would like a private, gentle instructor, and they will be happy to help you with that. It's a worthwhile investment in your health. I mean, seriously, look how much money we spend on medicine and healthcare. You can invest in a gentle yoga instructor teaching you how to do poses safely and giving you confidence to do it. And so, gentle yoga, eating a low histamine diet. So a low histamine diet means no more fermented foods. I know it's the fad right now, and probably because it's very delicious. I mean, it really does taste good, and it gives you that boost of histamine that feels really good, but it has that histamine that's too much for those of us whose histamine bucket is already full. It just overloads us. So it means getting rid of fermented foods, no more vinegar, and substituting. So for salads, you would have something like olive oil. Olive oil is very, olives when they're pickled have histamine, but the olive oil itself, before it's processed, before it's pickled, is very much low histamine. And then you can have your herbs on it. You want to stay away from anything that's hot from an Ayurvedic standpoint. So you wouldn't want to have cinnamon or sugar or chilies or anything that's hot from the taste that would amp your stress levels. You want to have cooling. One of the things I really enjoy on my salad is powdered sage. And it's exactly like the sage that you would burn to do smudging. And sage on the salad along with a little salt, it's delicious. It really, really tastes good. Also, you can have toasted nuts on your salad, but just make sure that you stay away from cashews and peanuts because they're very high in histamine. You can have the low histamine nuts of sesame, not sesame, sesame's high in histamine. Sunflower seeds, you can have almonds, you can have macadamia nuts. Again, they have to be non-fermented, non-aged, raw is best. You can toast them, put a little salt, a little olive oil on them. It tastes delicious to give you that little bit of flavor. And so you want to stay away from spinach. Let me give you some of the high histamine foods. Spinach, peaches, tomatoes. You can see there's nightshades here, the nightshades, eggplant, cashews, also strawberries. A lot of the berries very high in histamine. Citrus, kind of moderate, so just check out yourself, see how you do with that. You want to stay away from anything that's going to be genetically modified, of course, so get organic. It's worth the investment. Again, healthcare is expensive, so invest in preventative healthcare instead of trying to fix it on the other end from any kind of dietary cause. Usually people find that there's histamine in wheat and gluten products, so you can have rice as something that's very gentle. These days, rice is so prevalent, and make sure it's organic because one of the #1 genetically modified foods, genetically modified, I know there's studies that are paid for by the corporations, but I'm telling you, I've read all the studies that are from the independents, and you don't even have to read the studies. What's in a genetically modified food? They put herbicides, pesticides inside the food to blow up the stomachs of the worms and the bugs that are going to eat it. That's all it's about. It's like instead of spraying pesticides, it's inside the food. And so rice is one of the #1 foods that have the herbicides and pesticides inside of it. So stay away from it unless it's certified non-GMO, non-genetically engineered, they call it in some countries. Make sure it's organic. And so rice is a really good food, especially the brown whole rice. You can get pasta that's already made with brown rice. You can buy it on the internet if you don't have it at your local store. There's wonderful rice breads, so you don't have to feel like you're missing out. In fact, I find rice pizza crusts to be even more delicious than wheat-based pizza crusts. So give them a try. Ask your local grocer manager to order some gluten-free products, and a lot of the gluten-free products are rice. And you'll notice something. You'll notice that you don't binge on these foods. If you have an overeating issue, and I wished I'd known this, how long ago was that? 30 years ago, I was an eating disorder therapist. And so I was treating people in hospitals and outpatient with their compulsive overeating and also anorexia nervosa. And I wish I'd known then about histamine because I know it's triggering a lot of compulsive overeating and also alcoholism. It's people who are allergic to histamine and they can't stop. because you get this trigger cycle of it feels good, and then you're chasing the high to get that high again, and you can't after the first, boost. So anyway, staying away from histamine, and I've got a whole list of them in my book, Don't Let Anything Dull Your Sparkle, or you can easily go online and in your search engine, just search for high histamine food lists, and it'll tell you what's high histamine and what's low histamine. But you definitely want to stay away from the nightshades, anything fermented, anything aged. It includes leftovers, sorry, but the longer something sits, the more histamine it creates. So fresh foods. The two fruits that are low in histamine that you can have as juices are apple, organic of course, and mangoes, again organic. And you can buy mango chunks almost everywhere in the world as frozen fruit chunks, and a lot of it is organic. So do look for those. You can make juice out of them, smoothies. You can combine them with most of the vegetables except for the nightshades and spinach are low histamine. So you can make yourself beautiful apple-based kale, carrot, celery smoothie. Just don't put tomatoes or spinach in it. And no chili peppers. Nothing that's going to make a hot taste to it. So these are a few of the ways to decrease your cortisol and your histamine levels so that you can feel like yourself again, so that you don't feel panicked and afraid. And there's a lot of stressful things in the news, so know yourself. Again, secondary post-traumatic stress disorder can come from watching something that's horrendous and traumatic, can come from hearing it. So use discernment. I think it's important to know what's going on in the world. I think it's important to speak up and be an activist peacefully. But if you're feeling vulnerable or stressed, or you've had a lot of histamine, maybe that's not the time to read or watch the news. That's the time to listen to the music, get your yoga mat or your towel out, and go do some stretching, some gentle stretching, and find some peace. And finally, I want to leave you with this. Studies show that those who have a spiritual path, whether it's formal religion or spiritual beliefs, tend to have a lower stress level than those who believe this is a random universe and who are agnostic or atheist. And the reason is that we've got this belief that everything happens for a reason. And whether that's true or not, the studies show that that belief that everything happens for a reason is stress insulating. You don't tend to spike as much with the stress hormones. And also those who are in a spiritual community, whether it's church or temple or a spiritual group, have support. Having support from others is really important. And there's therapists who have training in post-traumatic stress disorder counseling. So I really encourage you to look for them. There's a group of therapists who have been trained in EMDR. Let's see if I can remember what this stands for. Eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Yes, that's it. EMDR.org or .com is the website to go to. You can find a therapist in your area that uses left brain, right brain, amazing technology to help you to lose the flashbacks, to erase the flashbacks, or at least reduce them so that they're manageable. I highly recommend them. Getting support is essential. And there is hope for you if you feel like you're a stress basket and nothing seems to be working. I hope that this video has been insightful. I do encourage you to look at my book for more information called Don't Let Anything Dull Your Sparkle. It's available worldwide in many languages as an ebook, as an audiobook if you want to listen to it, and also as a physical book. So I'm sending you lots of love. My prayers are with you, and I have a vision of each of us being at peace, taking care of ourselves to be at peace as our contribution to this peaceful world. So thank you for your part that you're playing in keeping the world at peace. And I'll see you soon.